Hi, my name is Arif Hameed, and welcome to my session on business continuity planning in the new work from home culture. So I'll start off with a little bit about myself. So I'm a senior director at a credit bureau. I handle a team that deals with client cybersecurity assurance. So that includes questionnaires, audits, remediation, support, contracts, RFPs, etc. Prior to my current role, I worked in security advisory, IT risk, third-party cyber risk, as well as IT audit at two of the largest Canadian banks. Myself, I actively participate in industry organizations, including EC Council, ISACA, Cloud Security Alliance, Secure World, as well as I sit on the program advisory councils for some educational institutions for their programs in cybersecurity and IT audit. So why are we here? COVID-19, this is a global phenomenon. All across the world, everyone has been impacted. Depending on which country you're in, certain things are loosening up. But with the coming of COVID-19, there's been a discussion. Is this really a black swan event? Something that was highly unlikely, but would have huge consequences? Or was this a gray rhino, where, especially with MARS, SARS, and all these other flus going around, was this something that we knew that it was about to come, and then we didn't really prepare for it? But regardless, whether it's a black swan or a white rhino, I meant we need to ensure the business is running, and the business resilience is really important. So when we're looking at it, you have your business continuity as well as your disaster recovery. So obviously disaster recovery is the IT component piece, where you want to ensure your technical systems are recovered. Business continuity, you want to ensure that your business processes are running in an optimal fashion to ensure the business is BAU as much as possible. Because of the current situation, many companies have activated their business continuity plan in the DR, where some companies are more mature than others. In that sense, some of the companies that are less mature, their plan was limited to just having that capability to work, that remote access, and that's just about it. Others may have actually kind of done a business impact analysis, did some kind of thorough pre-work around, and have a dedicated team around DR and business continuity management. They may have a plan in place, but for whatever reasons, it wasn't tested. The ones that are very mature, they've got something very thorough in place. They've done their plan, they've done failover testing, and if it's a real-time service, they may have alternate work locations that they have seats for, and they're quite mature. And then as part of your business continuity plan, I meant pandemic planning is also a component of this, where you have a plan in place to deal with a serious pandemic, and how do you ensure that your staff are working. But obviously, no one anticipated the extent of the COVID crisis, and how, forget about partially, but you have 100% work from home for many companies, right? And this is something no one anticipated. But as an aspect of that, the focus of a lot of DR planning was around production systems and your business continuity plan around the business and people working at alternate work locations. But I think the one aspect that some companies didn't look into properly was the work from home. So people didn't anticipate that work from home would be this extended. Like, depending on your country, you may be in week 7 or 8 of everything being shut down, and your BCM and DR plan in relation to work from home has not been fully developed. And that's the primary focus of my talk. To start off with, in any organization, policies and security awareness. With the new situation, this is probably a good time to kind of really look at your policies. Some, you may not even have a policy around work from home or acceptable use, or even electronic messaging. It's a good time to kind of write them if you don't have them, and then have a look at what are your gaps, right? Do you cover that? And then even with the policies and procedures and standards in place, I think the staff, or you may already have them in place, but the staff may not be aware of them. So just that reminder needs to take place with the staffing that, okay, you are working from home. I mean, there are certain acceptable use, electronic messaging, as well as code of conduct standards that apply to you regardless whether you're in the office or at your house, right? And this is a good time to kind of send that reminders out, update your policies, and maybe even for those companies that have security awareness in place, maybe set up a one-off or do it a bit earlier. Just it's a great time to kind of remind staff that these are our policies in place, right? That you need to abide by them, and a lot of times people are not aware, right? And this way, having that training, that course, having those communications to the staff, they'll understand what their responsibilities are. So the next aspect is home network. So obviously, the staff are at their homes. At times, some people may have their significant other at home. If you have children, you'll have them at home. And everyone needs internet access, especially with kids with online education going on at the moment. There'll be challenges around bandwidth, and your connection can be impacted, and that could bring you down depending on the strength of your own internet connection. So you need to ensure that some of these bandwidth intensive services, whether it's a Netflix or any type of video streaming, needs to be kind of considered, that the children may not, or others may not shouldn't be logging into those services during work hours. But it's not just the aspect of bandwidth. You have your home network with your router and modem. You should ensure that your firmware is up to date. I mean, with the lack of, if you're just like in a corporate network, hardware devices, software is all patched and up to date to ensure there's no any security concerns. I mean, this is a huge security risk if your router and your modem is not patched up to date. The encryption as well on your connectivity should be using WPA2 or stronger. I mean, I know web, where there's a lot of deprecated protocols that should be disabled. For the most part, for anyone that gets the router and modem from the stores, some of the newer devices are already default to that, but you should have a look at strengthening your encryption. Another easy one is your passwords, whether on your networking appliance at home. I mean, if you have a default password, whatever the manufacturer sent or maybe your provider sent, reset it to something that's strong and complex. Like, I know unfortunately it's very common for people to use part of their surname or even their home phone number as their password, which is a big no-no. Try to use something that's 8 to 10 characters with some complexity, lower, uppercase, etc., in numbers. And it's not just for the Wi-Fi. Another aspect is your router. Like, it's very common for people to forget that access to the router, the default is usually admin. People should be going in and resetting those passwords. And likewise, even if you have your password for some time, I mean, you should look into changing it. Reset those passwords. I mean, you have at times guests that have come over and you may have not had a separate guest network and they know your Wi-Fi password. So now is a good time to reset it. Another aspect is, I mean, obviously with the lockdown and with COVID, you're not dealing with social distancing, you're not dealing with guests. So another way to kind of strengthen your network setting is to set MAC address filtering. So only your devices, whether it's your laptop, your television, your mobile, any device at the home, you know what should access your network. Anything that is not on that, if that address is not on your filter, then it can't get access. And then just a joke on the side, if you have children, how are you securing them? They could be a risk as well. The next aspect is VPN. So I think one of the major issues that most companies encountered is bandwidth. And I think this has been addressed for the most part. I mean, Everyone has kind of increased their capacity. Others that may have some challenges may have started shift work to ensure that not everyone's on the network at the same time, or they should be kind of doing things offline when needed. So I think that aspect, for the most part, a lot of companies have addressed. But as part of their DR test, you may have tested your applications and other systems, but one of the things that at times is missing is that the VPN failover connectivity wasn't covered in your DR test. And I think that's something that, if that's not in your plan, you definitely should look into, because in the event you have an outage, there could be financial consequences for your business, right? If you're down and staff can't work. The other aspect is DDoS protection. You may have DDoS protection on your external client-facing websites or public-facing websites, but your VPN servers are not within that DDoS coverage, or maybe you don't have DDoS protection at all. Your ISP may have that service for you, for your company. You can add that on, or maybe you need something stronger, or the ISP doesn't have that service, and you could look into content delivery networks where they have a host of options at different strength levels. The next aspect is your VPN connection. I mean, many companies, unfortunately, have single-factor VPN connections, and this is a major risk on your network. You should have multi-factor authentication enabled. I know in the past, hard tokens were quite expensive, so many companies didn't want to go through that option, but you do have the capability of soft tokens. This is it's not as challenging. I mean, you may enable that token on the corporate device, but what's more recommended is out of band, probably on a mobile device if that's possible. The other aspect of the VPN connection is that you shouldn't be using a deprecated algorithm. Like, obviously, some of these VPNs been set up a long time ago. Standards have changed, especially like SHA-1 is no longer a valid hashing algorithm, which is common where some settings have that in place. Like, I guess your security team should look into what are the encryption protocols, because in the event you're using a deprecated algorithm, a lot of your data is at risk, as well as your network is at risk. So within your VPN connection, another important setting is always on VPN configuration. So your staff are using trusted devices. You shouldn't, where possible, it's not recommended that your trusted corporate device have direct access to the internet. Most of this should go to it should all be managed through the VPN, and this way you have logging and monitoring in place, as well as you have additional controls just to kind of manage the traffic and ensure there's security on the device and availability for the staff. I know with bandwidth constraints, you may want to enable split tunneling. So this allows you, for anyone that after they've logged in, they can actually still access the internet without the traffic being backhauled on the VPN. I think this should be definitely controlled. There's a number of cloud applications. You may have your email on the cloud. There's a lot of HR, finance applications where you're using a cloud service provider. So where possible, if you're going to enable split tunneling, you should have a CASB in place. These cloud access service brokers, that will kind of provide you the security, and it should be just limited to specific cloud-hosted applications. Alternatively, obviously, CASBs are not cheap. You may want host-based routing rules. So this allows for some of those cloud-based applications where, okay, you know what, we don't provide you open internet access, but there are certain exceptions where the IP address and URLs in, and you can have direct access from your machine after you've authenticated on. The other aspect is VPN sessions should have reasonable timeout sent. Obviously, you don't want people on the network 24/7. even though if they're not doing anything, there is a bandwidth implication that could impact your availability. Moreover, it's a security risk. So you should set a timeout of maybe 8 to 12 or whatever like kind of makes sense for your business. But obviously, you shouldn't have a always on VPN session. It should time out. Geo blocking, like I meant, if you don't have staff that are working in certain countries, obviously certain countries are of a higher risk, right? This should be enabled. I mean, especially now, depending on the size of your organization, you may not have staff that might be primarily in one jurisdiction. So why should you allow them to log in from countries that you know that they have no business being in, right? Also, to manage your bandwidth, you may have staff working shifts. You may not need people logging in like off hours. So you could probably enable a blackout period on the VPN. So for certain users, they're not going to be working off hours. I mean, let's just kind of control that access, right? They shouldn't be on, and if the need arises, and you can kind of set up an exception process and turn it on for a limited period through your help desk. As I said, I've taken the position that you should have somewhat always on VPN configuration, but depending on your line of business, it may not be viable to force anyone that's using a trusted corporate device to go through the VPN to have internet access, which is something I don't recommend. But if you allow direct internet access without logging into the network, at a minimum, the device needs to be configured to call home to ensure the patches are being up to date from time to time. So that's just the minimum. So the next aspect is the host posture assessment scan. So obviously, most VPNs have this feature, and for the most part, people have them on, where if you have a trusted device, you need to have some type of authentication and validation that this device is trusted. So within the whatever VPN client you're using, there's different features you can turn on. So I think one thing that's pretty much default is that, yes, the posture assessment will check, are you running the correct operating system, right? If you're a Windows 10 shop, someone should be using Windows 7, right? And if it's Windows 10, are the patches up to date? If they're not up to date, you can create a setting where it forces the patch before it allows connectivity. Another aspect is you can have registry key settings or files present hidden. The average user wouldn't know it, but this is a feature where on the posture assessment, they can tell that, okay, you know what, this is our corporate device because of these secret settings. Something even better than the registry key setting or a file present is a machine certificate. This is something you can update from time to time. This is on the expensive side, but this is a very solid control, and it provides more reliability than a file setting or registry key setting. The other thing is that along with the assessment, along with the operating system, it should check if the antivirus, the DLP, and other endpoint protection tools are up to date, right? And if they're not, then it should force a patch. Other type of requirements that could be scanned are the BIOS serial number. This might be a little bit challenging to do because obviously your asset registries, your asset inventory system should have all of those up to date, and it needs to be updated, especially if the device is being transferred. The MAC address is another good one. That's very just like same with the BIOS serial number, the MAC address is unique to every device, but that also requires a little bit of updates on the back end to ensure that the information is correct and the MAC address and the BIOS is updated to the correct person. The other aspect is obviously the host firewall to ensure that is running. So with all these checks in place, once the assessment is done and everything passes, then a trusted device should be let on the network. So another huge issue is logical access. So it's just we have all these people working from home, And this presents a huge, huge risk around insider threats. It's heightened. Um, when this, a few weeks ago, when all these companies started getting on to work from home, many people were sending access requests, not just for the remote access, but just a lot of services that they thought, okay, we do need, right? And we for this time, a lot of those access requests have been analyzed, approved, and provisioned. But I think the other aspect is, what about people's current access? Uh, a lot of times, people have things that they've had access to, they haven't looked into a while, and they don't really need. And like the management are doing their periodic access reviews, whether it's annually, biannually, or quarterly, but they just don't really look at some of those things that someone may not really need. Um, so this is a really good time to really, and this is an easy control. It's not very costly, right? Where you should go into your access rights of your staff and really evaluate that. Is this access based on least privilege and a job-related need? Do they actually need it? And is it at the minimum level that they need, right? It's not excessive. Like obviously, you'd be surprised if you do this evaluation of individuals' access. Uh, the best next aspect is with the laptops. Although most companies have their golden image and things are very tight, but there are times where local admin is open. So this is a very, very concerning thing, especially for regular users. Anyone can potentially download things off the internet, whether games, other types of software. It could be a freeware, but reality is it's a malware, as well as with all the with email and phishing and just so many type of avenues where things can get onto the machine. And having this local admin disabled will save a lot of headaches. And it just, if people want to be doing personal things, they shouldn't be using their corporate device. Another aspect is the BIOS. Um, a lot of times you might have a lockdown machine, everything is set, local admin is disabled, but the BIOS has users have direct access. A password has not been enabled. By allowing someone to have BIOS access, unfortunately, if your device got stolen, like someone can basically break into your device through the BIOS. There are a lot of tools that can break into to a laptop or a desktop, right? If the BIOS is open. I know with local admin may not be local admin could still be a concern for some staff where they need those rights, and you can't really knock that down, especially when you're dealing with legacy applications where local admin may need to be needed. An alternative to local admin, or something that you can kind of enable, is application whitelisting. Okay, fine, the local admin is there, but you know what? You cannot install anything that's not on a whitelist. So that kind of controls where, okay, the user can still do certain things, but they can only install off the whitelist. Also, the other good thing is with the whitelist, if you have that enabled, sometimes the support team may do things that are not appropriate. They have the capability to override the local admin, but by enabling the application whitelisting, you can kind of potentially lock that down, or just have an additional mechanism that, okay, you know what, someone has used the local admin and they've also overridden the whitelist. So that's another great control. I've touched on multi-factor authentication, but it shouldn't be just limited to your VPN access. A lot of times you may be using certain sensitive applications, whether on your internal network or maybe hosted on the cloud. You might have single sign-on, but if you want to have that additional level of security, especially for staff that are working from home on sensitive systems, or even on a production system, have that initial access of MFA. So in the event that there's some type of compromise, at least the individual the malicious actor may have those credentials, but if they don't have the second factor, they can't get in. They're stopped in their tracks. So data. So obviously, in any company, data is something that is very critical. Um, on an availability perspective, the backups are really important. I mean, companies have their production servers on backup jobs based on, and then have different settings, whether it's incremental, differential, and when the full backups are done uh, within the back-end production system. But something that's overlooked is the backup on the corporate laptops or the corporate devices for critical staff. Um, and I guess a lot of this could be more of a concern is where people are using legacy applications where a lot of the work is saved locally on the machine, and then you'd have to go at a later point to do that, the upload of the data. Um, I mean, large institutions have, especially a lot of the banks, have automated scheduled jobs to mirror local drives to the network drive. And these jobs are running not daily, but maybe every other day or so. But there's a huge bandwidth and capacity implication, right? Especially now, with everyone being working from home. And for a lot of companies, this is not an ideal factor. Um, Alternatively, you can get staff, you can encourage your staff to save the critical data on the corporate network storage, and obviously don't use Dropbox or something that's off the corporate network. But like especially for anyone that's working offline for an extended period, I mean, and you don't have the automated means for whatever limitations your organization may have, and have that awareness to the staff that okay, you know what, when you shut uh, end the day, please save your work back on the network drive. And likewise, along with saving the information, in the event there's a ransomware attack and your machine is locked, you need the data. If someone has already saved the data onto the network drive or onto your network, okay, if you lose the data on the laptop, someone's asking for ransomware, I mean, here's your backup control. I already need the data. You already have the data and you can recover it, and there's no need to make that payment. So along with the backups, the other aspect of data is data leakage. Um, like in this time, many companies have DLP controls in place. If you don't have a DLP agent, I would highly recommend you have one. You have certain policies in place around what type of data elements should be validated or just really secured and monitored. At this time, probably good to look into what are those policies to check if something needs to be tightened, especially around intellectual property. Like a lot of these DLP tools have settings around PCI DSS and like date of birth and certain other type of critical data that's already set. But depending on the nature of your industry and the data you deal with, you may need to have some more custom rules, right? And policies in place to manage that. Another aspect is, okay, you should disable local printer. In this day and age, for the most part, no one should be logging in, I mean, no one should be printing from home. But obviously, depending on your industry, there may be a business need to enable that. Obviously, you should kind of tighten controls around what's being printed, like that whole DLP. You may not block it, but you should have some type of monitoring control where, okay, this person is printing certain things and you need to be aware of it. And then for staff that are involved in certain using sensitive documents, you should provide them a shredder. Just like in the office, you're done with that document, you might have that bin. Unfortunately, you don't have that service at someone's home, but a shredder can manage that and ensure that they're shredding those documents that they don't need. USB ports, this should be locked down. This is a given. There may also be a need, depending on your business, where you need to have the capability to put something on a USB drive. Not recommended, but if you allow that, then any type of USB drive, you should have a configuration that only allows, that enforces encrypted USB drives, and it has to be a corporate issued USB drive. With the COVID pandemic, I mean, crime is still a concern, especially nowadays where people won't look twice if someone is wearing gloves and a mask. I've heard of robberies and stuff. So there is a chance that your laptop, your desktop could be stolen or any type of computing infrastructure. So you need to ensure that full encryption is enabled to prevent the data leakage. In addition to that, if the capability exists, you can do a remote wipe. I know that occurs for a lot of the mobile phones, but there are some software that provides the capability to do a remote wipe on a laptop or a desktop as well. So video conferencing, this is big in the news, especially with the issues around Zoom. So first aspect is that with any type of business continuity and DR, you don't want a single point of failure. And unfortunately, many organizations only subscribe to one conferencing solution. Like I would recommend that for sure get a secondary and maybe even a tertiary video conferencing solution. So if your primary goes down, you have an alternative. And especially if you're an organization or you're part of especially certain groups where, you know what, they are on long meetings, there's a lot of that engagement, especially with Agile and Scrum, and you're in these long sessions where you really need to have that enabled. You can't, like if there is an outage, it can have huge implications and delays in your projects. So you should be looking at multiple solutions. If you're running a video conference or any type of conferencing, you should have at a given an access code or password should be enabled. The conference host, you shouldn't allow anyone to connect until the host is connected. There are some tools that have a lobby feature where, okay, you know what, people are waiting in, and this also allows the host to kind of look into who is in the waiting room and allow them to kind of connect in. And likewise, if someone has shared the access code or the password, the host has the capability to check, okay, you know what, I need to identify this person, you know what, this number is off or the access is wrong. I don't know this person, I'm not allowing them in. Just having that little bit of additional control of round access. At times you may do recording on your sessions. You should also look at the encryption strength. I mean, sometimes, and unfortunately, people may say certain things on these conferences that may be very sensitive in nature, especially around your intellectual property. This is being recorded, so you need to ensure that the encryption is really strong. So in the event that the conferencing solution provider may have a potential compromise, at least your information is secure because the bad actors can't break into it. The other aspect is that you need to be careful along with the recording is there's also the file transfer capabilities. This is a potential data leakage point in your organization, especially when you're dealing with, if you're running a conference and you may be dealing with external parties, right? So sometimes people may accidentally do things, right? There's no malicious intent, but I mean, once the file has been transferred, there can be challenges here. But regardless of the tool, you need to ensure that the security capabilities are understood and applied. And I guess with the news around Zoom, a lot of the companies that have their web conferencing solutions, they're providing like good white papers and documentation on where their security capabilities reside. So in summary, work from home is the new normal. Obviously, the environment has changed. Companies have invested in infrastructure that have supported this. There's a lot of investment companies where they frowned upon it, but now that it's there, staff are used to working from home, and quite frankly, they're seeing the benefits of avoiding long traffic jams, right? When things kind of return to somewhat of a normal, I mean, work from home definitely will be here to stay. Um, so I guess some of the major aspects is that you should look at your controls to determine where your gaps or deficiencies reside. And what is the risk around, especially the availability and security around your work from home capabilities to ensure that it's business as usual. Um, Obviously, there's going to be a number of risks, and you have limited budget, and you may need to do things in phases. So you need to take a risk-based approach, determine what is important to your industry and the staff, as well as to the staff that's performing the work, right? So by taking that approach, you'll know where you should invest your money and what needs to be done before other things can be addressed, right? Last but not least is you may want to consider process re-engineering. You may be dealing with a lot of paper-based processes. Uh, with work from home, you've probably had some interim workaround measures, but you should really reevaluate some of these old processes to determine, okay, you know what, how can we digitize and automate this, and ensure that in the event we have another crisis, hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully this COVID is a once in a lifetime event, but we're more prepared. And it's truly more of a great rhino. That's the end of my presentation, but I'm open to any questions or concerns anyone has.